Back here on HQ Spotlight, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are trying to get back to the title game and build upon that magical CFP run that we saw last season. They had a tough Week 1 matchup against the Miami Hurricanes and ultimately came up short. Now, the opponent for this Saturday doesn't get necessarily any easier. Maybe a little. It's number 16 Texas A&M, and we're hearing that urgency is something that is being stressed to Notre Dame when they were off. So here's Notre Dame running back Jadarian Price on how the Fighting Irish are trying to become more urgent after an 0-1 start to the season.
As far as urgency, every time I walk through the halls, I see guys in the film room after hours, putting work in, whether it was a bye week or early on this week. Coach Freeman did a good job of relaying the message down, and all the position coaches, we got to be urgent. There's no shortcuts to this thing. We just got to trust the process.
All right, let's welcome back the guys, Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah here. So Marcus Freeman telling all the guys there in Notre Dame, hey, we got to be urgent. They're still looking for their first win of the season. Tom, what should the level of urgency be here for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish in your eyes?
I don't know. I was getting mixed messages there. I was hearing to be urgent, but I also heard to trust the process. I feel like those two things are in conflict with one another. But
you would know about trusting the process.
I do think, if you are Notre Dame, there is a sense of urgency in that you don't want to get off to an 0-2 start, and you are facing a good opponent. So if you get off to a sluggish start in this game, you could find yourself in a precarious position that's going to be very difficult to dig your way out of, particularly with a young and still inexperienced quarterback. Now, the difference is, at least this time you are at home, so you will have the crowd behind you and that kind of support, making life more difficult on Texas A&M. But I do think that, yes, their schedule is very much front-loaded. These are the games that are the biggest ones on their schedule, so you can't afford to really come out and not be firing on all cylinders. And I do think that's kind of what's somewhat different about this, in that there weren't a lot of teams who took a bye last week. Notre Dame was one of them. So you come off that loss and then you're just kind of sitting around for 2 weeks, just chomping at the bit to get back at it. I don't think urgency will be a problem for this team in this game. It's just the question, will they be too amped up?
And Tom, you mentioned it as we're looking at the schedule here. It is front-loaded, right? You see those opponents on the left-hand side of the screen. So, Shehan, how important is it for Notre Dame to not only win against A&M, but really have some style points as they're trying to build a resume? Because come, November, December down the stretch, when the CFP is looking at their resume saying this team should be in the college football playoff, how important is it for them to really come out strong against A&M for resume boosting purposes?
Well, you look up and down that schedule, the real issue is you only see rankings by two of those teams, and it's the first two games against Miami and Texas A&M. You look down the rest of the schedule, there really aren't more opportunities to prove yourself on the national stage. This is kind of the only other one. Now, maybe a team like USC gets into the mix, maybe Boise State gets back, who knows? But the reality is those aren't necessarily going to be the type of resume game that this is. You're playing against an SEC opponent at home, a team that obviously went and won 8 games last year, was in the thick of the SEC and college football playoff race. This, to me, is a must-win game for this program if they want to make the college football playoff. Because, look, we have this new adjusted criteria for schedule strength. Notre Dame's not going to rate all that well in it because of how some of these teams that maybe were good last year have fallen down coming into 2025. If you don't have a single ranked win on your schedule and you are a 2-loss team heading into the month of November and December, I don't think that puts you in a good spot at all when it comes to college football playoff selection. They have to come away with a win here.
Oof, must win going into week 3. It's really not where you want to be, right? We're going to talk about impact players to watch for Notre Dame. And Tom, I'll come to you first. We're talking about arguably one of the best players in college football, and Jeremiah Love.
Yeah, and he did not have much of an impact in that season opening loss against Miami, where he was held to only 33 yards on the ground and had 4 catches for 26 yards. Now, you can look at the 14 touches and say that's probably about the amount that he's going to get on most games. It's just the production wasn't there, and Miami's defense deserves a whole heck of a lot of credit for it, because that front 7 was playing phenomenal in that game and was overwhelming the Notre Dame offensive line. So Jeremiah Love did not really have many lanes to run through, which is probably why he tried to hurdle over them so many times in the game. But you do need to find a way to get him the ball and get him into opportunities where he can shine against the Texas A&M defense, to which, to be frank, They've played UTSA and Utah State, and that defense has looked a little soft at times in that both of those teams have been able to push the ball down the field and put up points against them. So I need to see Jeremiah Love have a big game, because honestly, I don't know if Notre Dame can win this game if Jeremiah Love doesn't have a big game.
For me, I'm going to go to the Notre Dame defensive side of the ball, and Leonard Moore was one of the top breakout players of the 2024 season at cornerback, and he looks like one of the best in college football right now. Well, Texas A&M, probably their strongest component to this point has been their passing offense under Marcel Reed. They brought in a couple of really key receivers, one of whom we'll get to in a second, but I think that for them, if Notre Dame's able to man up their receivers, especially with a player like Moore, it changes the way that you defend Texas A&M in this game. And it makes it a whole lot easier for their new defense. And so I think that this is going to be a good matchup with Leonard Moore and the Texas A&M wide receiver core. You need him to look like a potential first-round pick, like we know he is.
And what about the Texas A&M side of things? Shehan, who's somebody that you're going to be keeping your eyes on that team?
Well, obviously, I mentioned the DBs of Notre Dame. Well, I'm going to go to the wide receivers of Texas A&M. They added a couple of big-time pieces, but none was bigger than NC State transfer Casey Concepcion. Not only has he been a major contributor at wide receiver for Texas A&M this season, he's been a weapon on special teams as well. In that season-opening win over UTSA, he returned a punt for a touchdown, and you really need that dynamic type of component to your team. I'd argue that it's one of the things that Texas A&M lacked the most last year. So especially at a time where, like Tom mentioned, their defense has been a little suspect, they're still kind of coming back in the running game, they need Casey Concepcion to have a big game. And I mentioned, of course, Leonard Moore as a big-time player. You need him to be able to take multiple defenders away on every single passing play.
Yeah, I'm going to go to that A&M defense that I think needs to take a step forward, and I'm looking at Sam Impemba, who, if you look at his stats, only 1.5 tackles for loss and a sack early through 2 games, but you watch the tape, he's been much more impressive than that. I want to see him start getting home and getting some sacks.
All right, want to get a game pick. Notre Dame 6.5-point favorites. The total 49 and a hook. Shehan, what do you like?
Yeah, that's a big line, but I think it's probably deserved. I think that Notre Dame, you saw in the second half of that Miami game, them come together, look like the national contender that was promised to you. I think that they take care of business. I think that Texas A&M's defense struggles in some big spots, and Notre Dame ultimately comes away with a 7-point victory.
All right, Shehan, Tom, we certainly appreciate it, previewing Notre Dame A&M that we have to look forward to this weekend. You can hear more from Tom on the Cover 3 podcast alongside the crew. They got Week 3 locks in your feed right now, best bets, odds, picks, including for A&M, Notre Dame, Florida, LSU, and so much more. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen. We have more HQ Spotlight coming up after the break.